نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. The question that I received is it permissible to feed a child from milk that comes from the milk bank? Now, before we can answer this question, we need to go ahead and understand what is the function or what is a milk bank. A milk bank is an institution or a bank that collects donated milk from women who wish to sell it or who wish to donate their milk to the bank, in the same way that we have nowadays a blood bank. Now, this was set up in order to supply human milk to mothers who were unable to produce their own milk, especially if their babies were born prematurely and the baby, he cannot take any baby formula. Now, in Islam, we know that kinship or family ties, it can develop due to a baby nursing on the milk of someone else. And this is known as milk kinship or foster kinship or milk siblings or foster siblings or a foster mother or a milk mother. Now, why is this important? Because every single rule in terms of the maharim, in terms of who is your mahram and who you cannot marry, also applies to this type of a relationship. So just like how a person cannot marry his mother, he also is prohibited to marry someone who directly gave him the milk. And she is known as the nursing mother. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions this in the Quran. حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ وَعَمَّاتُكُمْ وَخَالَاتُكُمْ حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ وَعَمَّاتُكُمْ وَخَالَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُ الْأَخِ وَبَنَاتُ الْأُخْتِ وَأُمَّهَاتُكُمُ اللَّاتِي أَرْضَعْنَكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُم. So Allah, He says that prohibited for you in marriage are your mothers. And then He goes on the list and then He mentions, and your milk mothers. Prohibited for you in marriage are your milk mothers who nursed you, and your sisters through nursing. So it could be someone completely random, but if she was fed the milk from the same individual that you took milk from, she is called your milk sister. And she is haram for you, just like how your blood sister is haram for you. And also the Prophet ﷺ, he confirmed this in the hadith that is narrated both in Bukhari and Muslim. يَحْرُمُ مِنَ الرَّضَاعِ مَا يَحْرُمُ مِنَ النَّسَبِ. That whatever becomes forbidden for you through breastfeeding is the same which becomes mahram through blood ties. So if someone through blood ties becomes haram for you, then the same rule applies if it was through breastfeeding. Now, the other question that comes up, before I go to, the actual question of the milk bank, the question is, how much is required for a baby to drink before an Islamic mother-child relationship is developed? How much of milk does a baby need to drink, and when do they need to drink it before this milk relationship is developed? Now, according to the Hanafis, the foster relationship is established if a child, he is under 2 years old and he drinks one full feeding. So if he is fed one full time in which the baby latches off from the milk, this is considered, according to the Sharia, that this baby is full. And so they said one complete breastfeeding is enough in order to go ahead and establish this mahramiyya, this prohibition. Now she becomes his milk mother. Now, according to the majority of the scholars of the Malikis and the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis, they say that foster relationship is established if a child is breastfed a minimum of 5 times. And this breastfeeding it means that the child must be the one who stops drinking the milk, not that the mother takes him off from the milk. No, the child is the one who should latch off and say, I don't want to drink anymore, which means that he is full. So 5 full breastfeeding, and he must be under 2 years old. And they base this upon the hadith, a few hadith, and one of them is by Aisha radiallahu anha, in which he says that when the Quran was first revealed, the number of breastfeedings that would make a child a relative was 10. Then this was abrogated and replaced with the number of 5, which is well known, and this hadith is in Sahih Muslim. Now, in order for us to understand the potential shari'i ramifications, so I hope everyone understands what is a milk bank. Now, in order for us to understand the shari'i, the Islamic ramification of receiving milk from a milk bank, the procedure of how these banks process their milk, we must understand how do they process this milk. What do they do with the milk that comes from those women who donate or who sell their milk. Now, it is also necessary for the foster parents and the foster child to be aware of each other's identities in order to observe these shari'i ramifications. Now, how is the milk processed in the milk bank? It's either done in one of 2 ways. It's done in one of 2 ways. Number one, the first method, it involves pooling together the milk of several donors into one storage vessel. So let's say there's 100 women who donate their milk. They will go ahead and combine all of that in one container, and they will go ahead and heat it, filter it, they will pasteurize it, they will put it through several testing in order for them to screen for different types of bacteria, viruses, HIV, hepatitis B, and so on. They will do all of that. And then they will go ahead and put it into individual bottles for individual babies' consumption. Is that clear? Now, what have they done? They have stored 100 women, their milk, and they've mixed everything together. And now you will have a fraction of each 100 woman's milk in each bottles. Depends, maybe they make 50 bottles out of it, maybe they will make 100 bottles out of it. That's not, that's not really of a concern. Now, according to some scholars, especially the Hanafis and Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, he's the one who said this. He said that if the mixed milk of multiple women is given to a child, then the foster relationship will be established for each and every individual donating woman. So this person, this child, he will go ahead and have 100 different foster mothers through the milk. And so this type or this method, it poses a problem from a Shari'i perspective, because now how are we going to go ahead and identify those particular women from whom the milk came from? And so now now imagine you do this for a period of 25 years. You do this for a period of, let's say, 1 million children. And then you can imagine that those children are going to get married, and you can see the ramifications that it will have on a particular country, on a particular city. The second method involves pooling the milk from each milk donor individually. So they will have one person who will continuously give on a daily, on a weekly, whatever basis that they can. And they will go ahead from that particular batch, they will pull all of her milk together and follow the same process, and then it is not mixed with the milk of the other donors. Now, in this case, it is easier to establish the identity of who the foster mother is. However, we still have a problem. And that problem is that these milk banks, they do not notify the donors who the recipient or who the donor was. They do not inform the mother of the child who the donor of this milk is. And so sometimes, these key information is kept confidential. In certain countries, it is kept confidential for a number of years. And the reason it is kept confidential is obvious, for obvious reasons. It is not kept confidential, or rather, they do not share this information for any. They do not share this information at all, except for clinical purposes. Except when they need to go ahead and trace the donor and the recipient for any possible contamination that had occurred or something that had happened, which they missed, then they will go ahead and share that information. Otherwise, it is strictly confidential, even in Muslim countries. Even in Muslim countries. So, when these babies that are born prematurely, and they require a whole month, or even more, or sometimes a bit less, month of supply of milk in order for them to go ahead and gain that necessary function. Now we could go ahead and imagine 1 month of supply. Each day the baby is consuming 10 times the milk. So his mahramiyya is automatically developed or established in half a day, even if it comes from that one individual. But who is that mother? Imagine that mother is a serial donor. She is just, donating milk after milk to the milk bank. And because of her, she has 1,000. She has 2,000 foster children because of her. And then you can imagine the relationship that these people will have. You might have a sibling and you don't even know it. And so here in the Western countries, now we have another issue here. And that is, here in the Western countries, most of the donors are who? In fact, we could say 99.9% of the donors are non-Muslims. And we know that these non-Muslims, they do not observe the same Islamic diet that Muslims observe when it comes to what they eat and what they drink. And this brings me to the question which was also asked, and that is it permissible to give a child milk from a donor that eats pork or drinks alcohol, knowing very well that some of the protein from the pork or pork protein is found in the milk of the donor, and it is going to be passed on to the child when the child is drinking the milk. And so there are actually some of the scholars, they mention with regards to this, some of the scholars, they mention some conditions. And one of the conditions is that if you are going to have a nursing mother for your child, it must be a Muslim. Imam Malik, rahimahullah, he specifically said that it is not permissible for a Nasraniyya, for a Christian lady to be the wet nurse of your child. And he mentions very specifically why. He says, because of them eating pork. And he said, I am afraid that it will be passed on to the child. I'm afraid that it will be passed on to the child. In fact, he based this upon what? He based this upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he prohibited the mentally ill individuals, the hamqa, أن تسترضع الحمقاء, that the mentally ill people, that they should not be wet nurses, because it is proven that whatever physical and mental state and physiological state the mother is in, that is going to have an effect on the child, even when the child is in her womb. And when she is breastfeeding that child, it is going to have that emotional effect on that child as well. And this is, there is actually some research that has gone into this. And so, the conclusion is what? The conclusion is that it is prohibited, according to the majority of the scholars of our time. In fact, we have a spectrum. Some of the scholars, they mention that these milk banks are permissible, but they have put certain conditions on there that when I read those conditions and we are trying to apply it in our time, we are unable to apply them, and therefore the default is what? That it is impermissible for a person to go ahead and take milk from these milk banks in order for them to feed the child without really knowing the source of these milk and without identifying who the donor is in order to establish the mahramiyah. And in this type of an environment where everything is, is about globalization and commercialization, and you might, the effect that it will have upon the children after 20 years, 25 years can be very significant, and a person, there will be a high likelihood that a person will be marrying his foster sibling.